The tavern fell silent as Commander Zekthul raised one of his forearms, the scarred chitin catching the dim light. Around him, young recruits from dozens of species leaned forward, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The old warrior's reputation preceded him everywhere he went in the galaxy. He was the only known survivor of the Human Covenant War's bloodiest battle, and tonight, after years of silence, he had finally agreed to tell his story. "You think you know about humans," Zekthul began, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the establishment. "You've heard the stories, seen the propaganda videos, read the reports, but you don't know anything. None of you do." A young Altarian recruit, barely past his molting season, spoke up with the confidence only youth could provide. "Sir, we studied human tactics at the Academy. They're aggressive and unpredictable, but they're still just another species. Their technology is primitive, their ships are slow, and they lack proper military discipline." Zekthul's mandibles clicked in what those familiar with his species recognized as bitter amusement. Primitive? Slow? Undisciplined? He took a long drink from his cup, the liquid helping to ease the old pain that flared up whenever he remembered those dark days. "Young one, sit back down and listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you might save your life someday." The tavern keeper, a wise old Vorthan who had seen many wars come and go, dimmed the lights even further and activated the privacy field. Whatever the commander was about to share, it would be for their ears only. "It was the year 2387 by the human calendar," Zekthul continued, his three eyes growing distant as memory took hold. "I was a fleet admiral then, commanding the 47th Covenant Armada, 12,000 ships, the finest in the galaxy. We had just received orders to pacify a small human colony on the edge of their territory. Intelligence reported it as a minor agricultural world with minimal defenses. A simple operation that would serve as a warning to Earth about the consequences of refusing our generous offer to join the Covenant under our protection." The recruits exchanged glances. They all knew how that war had ended, but none had ever heard the details from someone who was actually there. "The planet was called Haven," Zekthul said, the name seeming to leave a bitter taste in his mouth. "Population of about 50,000 humans, mostly farmers, miners, and their families. Our long-range scans showed exactly what intelligence had promised. No orbital defenses, no military installations, just a few small settlements scattered across the main continent." He paused, taking another drink. "We thought it would be over in hours. A simple show of force, perhaps a few warning shots, and the humans would surrender. Then we could establish a Covenant garrison and move on to more important matters." A Krillian engineer raised one of her delicate appendages. "But sir, if it was such a simple operation, how did things go wrong?" Zekthul's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Go wrong? Child, nothing went wrong with our plan. Our plan was perfect, executed flawlessly. The problem was that we didn't understand what we were dealing with. We thought we were fighting humans. We had no idea we were about to face something far more dangerous." The old veteran stood up slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the room. "You see, there's something about humans that you can't learn from studying their technology or analyzing their ship designs, something that doesn't show up in intelligence reports or tactical assessments." He walked to the large viewport that dominated one wall of the tavern, staring out at the stars beyond. "Humans have this thing they call stubbornness, but that's not really the right word. It's something deeper, more primal. When they decide something is worth protecting, when they choose to make a stand, they become something else entirely." Back at his seat, Zekthul activated a small holographic projector. The image that appeared showed a peaceful blue-green world, its surface dotted with small cities and vast agricultural areas. This was Haven before we arrived. Beautiful, wasn't it? The humans had been there for about 30 years, turning what had been a barren rock into something resembling their home world. The image shifted, showing the massive Covenant fleet as it approached the planet. The contrast was staggering. Thousands of sleek, predatory warships descending on a world that seemed utterly defenseless. We announced our presence according to standard protocol, Zekthul continued, demanded their immediate surrender, offered them the chance to relocate peacefully. Standard Covenant expansion procedures. We expected them to respond within hours, probably with a desperate plea for mercy or perhaps some futile attempt at negotiation. His mandibles clicked again, but this time the sound held no amusement. Instead, we received a transmission that I'll never forget. A single human, a woman named Sarah Chen, who apparently spoke for their governing council. She looked directly into the camera and said, "You are not welcome here. Leave now, or we will make you leave." The young recruits stirred uneasily. Such defiance in the face of overwhelming force seemed not just foolish, but suicidal. We laughed, Zekthul admitted. An entire armada laughed at the audacity of these primitives. Our commander, Admiral Vorthak, decided to make an example. He ordered a precision strike on one of their smaller settlements, just enough to show them we were serious. The holographic display changed again, showing a small farming community nestled in a valley between rolling hills. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic. The strike was perfect, the veteran continued. Clean, precise, no civilian casualties. We simply destroyed their power grid and communication array. A clear demonstration that resistance was futile. Then we waited for their surrender. He paused, his expression growing dark. What we got instead was the first hint of what humans are really capable of. Instead of surrendering, every single settlement on the planet went dark. Complete communication silence. Our sensors detected massive amounts of underground activity, but we couldn't make sense of what we were seeing. A young Thessian pilot leaned forward. Were they building bunkers? Trying to hide? Zekthul shook his head slowly. We thought so at first. Admiral Vorthak was pleased. He believed we had successfully intimidated them, and they were simply preparing for the inevitable. He gave them 12 hours to formally surrender, after which we would begin orbital bombardment of military targets. The old warrior's voice grew quieter, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. During those 12 hours, something extraordinary happened on Haven. Something that our sensors couldn't detect, our intelligence couldn't predict, and our military doctrine couldn't account for. The holographic display shifted again, now showing thermal imaging of the planet's surface. Instead of the expected pattern of frightened civilians huddled in shelters, the images revealed something far more disturbing. Massive coordinated movement across the entire planet, with humans emerging from hidden positions and moving with military precision. The farmers weren't just farmers, Zekthul said quietly. The miners weren't just miners. We had completely misunderstood what we were looking at. Haven wasn't just a colony. It was a carefully planned military outpost disguised as a civilian settlement. The recruits exchanged worried glances. This wasn't matching any of the intelligence briefings they had received about human capabilities. But that still wasn't the most dangerous thing about the humans on Haven, Zekthul continued. What made them truly terrifying wasn't their deception or their preparation. It was what they chose to do when faced with our ultimatum. He turned back to face the group, his scarred features grim. When those 12 hours expired, we began our bombardment. Standard procedure, targeting what our scans identified as military installations and weapons depots. But something was wrong. Every target we hit exploded with far more force than it should have. The holographic display now showed the orbital bombardment in progress, but the explosions were massive, far beyond what conventional weapons should have produced. They had turned their entire planet into a weapon, Zekthul said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. Every mining operation, every industrial facility, every piece of infrastructure had been rigged with explosives, not just to deny us resources, but to maximize damage to any ground forces we might deploy. A Corvan strategist looked confused. But sir, that would destroy their own planet. Why would they sacrifice everything they had built? Zekthul's 3 eyes fixed on the young officer. Because that's what humans do. When they can't win, they make sure you can't win either. When they can't save what they love, they make sure you pay the highest possible price for taking it. The veteran activated another control, and the hologram showed the Covenant fleet moving into lower orbit, preparing for the ground assault that was supposed to secure the planet. Admiral Vorthak was annoyed by the sabotage, but not concerned. We still had overwhelming numerical superiority and technological advantages. The plan was simple. Deploy our ground forces, secure the major population centers, and establish Covenant control. Standard conquest protocol. Zekthul's expression grew even darker. What we didn't understand was that the explosions weren't random acts of sabotage. They were signals. Every detonation was coordinated, timed to reveal our positions and intentions to every human on the planet. The holographic display zoomed in to show individual Covenant dropships descending toward the surface. They looked invincible, their armor gleaming as they cut through the atmosphere. The first wave landed successfully, Zekthul continued. 12,000 elite Covenant warriors, the best trained and equipped soldiers in the galaxy. They secured their landing zones and began advancing toward the primary targets according to plan. He paused, his mandibles clicking slowly. That's when we learned what humans are really capable of. The hologram shifted to show the surface of Haven from ground level. What had appeared to be empty farmland and abandoned settlements from orbit was revealed to be something entirely different up close. Every field, every building, every road had been transformed into a killing ground, Zekthul said quietly. The humans hadn't fled or hidden. They had simply become invisible. 50,000 farmers and miners had turned themselves into the most effective guerrilla force the galaxy has ever seen. The young recruits leaned forward, captivated despite their fear. This wasn't the sanitized version of events they had learned in their military academies. The first attacks came from the crops themselves, the veteran continued. Plants that looked normal from a distance were actually concealing weapons emplacements. Our soldiers would advance through what appeared to be a wheat field, only to discover that every stalk was hiding a sensor or an explosive device. The holographic display showed Covenant soldiers moving cautiously through farmland, their weapons ready but pointed in the wrong directions. But the crops were just the beginning. The humans had spent 30 years learning every inch of their world, and they had used that knowledge to turn the entire planet into one massive trap. They knew exactly where we would land, which routes we would take, how we would deploy our forces. Zekthul's voice grew heavy with remembered pain. Within the first hour, we had lost contact with 17% of our ground forces. Not destroyed, not retreating, just gone. Vanished into a landscape that seemed peaceful and empty, but was actually crawling with enemies we couldn't see or detect. The hologram now showed the chaos of the first day's fighting, with Covenant forces scattered across the planet, trying to establish communications and coordinate their response to an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Admiral Vorthak ordered an immediate withdrawal to defensive positions, Zekthul said. Standard protocol when facing unexpected resistance, but the humans didn't give us time to regroup. The display shifted to show nightfall on Haven, and the veteran's expression grew even grimmer. That's when we learned that humans don't just fight during the day. The darkness on Haven brought with it a terror that Zekthul had never experienced before in his long military career. As he continued his tale, the old veteran's voice took on a haunted quality that made even the most seasoned warriors in the tavern shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You have to understand," he said, his three eyes reflecting the dim light like ancient scars. Most species in the galaxy fight according to established patterns. There are rules, protocols, acceptable behavior even in warfare. We had fought the Krillians, the Vorthans, even the savage Zektal pirates, but we had never encountered anything like what the humans did that first night. The holographic display showed the Covenant defensive positions scattered across Haven's surface, looking like islands of light in an ocean of darkness. The soldiers had dug in well, following standard military doctrine with overlapping fields of fire and sensor coverage. Our night vision was excellent. Our sensors were military grade, and we had orbital support, Zekthul continued. Admiral Vorthak was confident that once we had established defensive positions, we could hold until reinforcements arrived. The humans might have surprised us, but they were still just primitives with inferior technology. A young Altarian recruit raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what happened that changed things?" Zekthul's mandibles clicked in that bitter way again. "The humans happened, young one. They showed us that technology and training mean nothing when faced with something far more dangerous than any weapon." The hologram zoomed in on one of the defensive positions, showing Covenant soldiers manning their posts with disciplined efficiency. Everything looked normal, professional, exactly as it should be. "The attacks began at exactly midnight, Haven local time," the veteran said. "But they didn't come from where our sensors were watching. They didn't come from the obvious approach routes or the tactical positions we had identified. They came from below." The display shifted to show cross-sections of the ground beneath the Covenant positions. What had appeared to be solid earth was actually honeycomb, with tunnels, chambers, and passages that had been carefully constructed over decades. The humans had been preparing for this day for 30 years, Zekthul explained. Every mine, every foundation, every irrigation system had been designed with warfare in mind. They had built a three-dimensional battlefield that extended kilometers underground. The recruits watched in fascination and horror as the hologram showed human figures moving through the tunnel system like deadly shadows, approaching Covenant positions from directions that should have been impossible. "But the tunnels were just infrastructure," the veteran continued. "What made them truly terrifying was how the humans used them. Our first indication that something was wrong came when soldiers started disappearing from their posts. The holographic display showed a Covenant sentry simply vanishing between one moment and the next, his position empty as if he had never existed. "Not killed, not captured, just gone," Zekthul said quietly. "The humans would emerge from hidden passages, neutralize a guard silently, and disappear back underground before anyone noticed. Sometimes they would take the soldier with them. Sometimes they would leave behind something that looked like the original soldier but wasn't quite right." A Thessian pilot looked confused. "What do you mean, not quite right?" The old warrior's expression grew even darker. "The humans had studied us, learned our biology, our psychology, our behavior patterns. They knew exactly how to create doubt and fear in our ranks. A soldier who stood a little too still, who didn't respond quite normally to orders, who seemed to be watching his own comrades too carefully." The hologram showed Covenant soldiers becoming increasingly paranoid, turning their weapons on each other as trust broke down within their ranks. By dawn of the second day, we had lost 30% of our ground forces, Zekthul continued. Not to direct combat, but to fear, confusion, and the growing realization that we were fighting an enemy that didn't follow any rules we understood. The display shifted to show Admiral Vorthak in the command center of the flagship, his expression growing more frustrated as reports came in from the surface. "The Admiral ordered a full orbital bombardment of the areas around our positions," the veteran said. "If the humans were using tunnels, we would collapse them. If they were hiding in the landscape, we would reshape the landscape. It was brutal, but it was logical." The hologram showed massive energy beams lancing down from orbit, turning square kilometers of Haven's surface into molten glass. For a few hours it seemed to work, Zekthul admitted. The attack stopped, our sensors couldn't detect any underground movement, and our surviving ground forces were able to regroup and establish better defensive positions. He paused, taking another long drink from his cup. We should have known it was too easy. The young Corvan strategist leaned forward. What happened next, sir? The humans taught us another lesson about what they're capable of, Zekthul replied grimly. They showed us that destruction doesn't stop them. It just makes them more creative. The holographic display showed the bombed areas of Haven's surface, now scarred wastelands of glass and twisted metal. But as the image enhanced, it revealed something that made the recruits gasp. They had turned our bombardment into part of their strategy, the veteran explained. The molten glass created perfect cover for movement. The destroyed tunnels provided raw materials for new weapons. The craters became defensive positions that our orbital sensors couldn't penetrate. The hologram zoomed in to show human figures moving through the devastated landscape like ghosts, using the destruction itself as camouflage and cover. But that wasn't the worst part, Zekthul continued. The worst part was what they did to our casualties. The recruits exchanged uncomfortable glances. They all knew that warfare sometimes involved difficult choices, but something in the veteran's voice suggested they were about to hear something far worse than standard military casualties. The humans had been recovering our wounded and dead soldiers throughout the fighting, he said quietly. We assumed they were taking prisoners or gathering intelligence, standard behavior for any military force. The holographic display showed a makeshift Covenant medical station, with wounded soldiers being treated by their comrades. On the morning of the third day, we received a transmission from the human leader, Sarah Chen, Zekthul continued. She wanted to discuss a prisoner exchange. Humanitarian gesture, she called it. Admiral Vorthak agreed, thinking it might be an opportunity to open negotiations. The veteran's three eyes closed briefly, as if the memory was too painful to face directly. The exchange was set for noon, in an open area between our lines. We sent a small diplomatic party with some human prisoners we had captured. They sent a single vehicle with our people. The hologram showed the exchange in progress. Two small groups meeting in the middle of a scarred battlefield. Our soldiers looked normal when they climbed out of the human vehicle, Zekthul said. Wounded, exhausted, but alive and apparently unharmed. Our medical team immediately began examining them for injuries and signs of mistreatment. The display zoomed in on the rescued Covenant soldiers, showing them being helped toward the medical station. That's when we discovered what the humans had really been doing for the past 3 days, the veteran said, his voice barely above a whisper. Our soldiers hadn't just been prisoners, they had been students. The recruits looked confused, but Zekthul's expression made it clear that this was not a positive development. The humans had spent 72 hours teaching our people about human history, human culture, and human warfare, he explained, not through torture or brainwashing, but through conversation, through stories, through simple human contact. The holographic display showed archived footage of human and Covenant soldiers sitting together, apparently engaged in casual conversation. You have to understand, Zekthul continued, we had been taught that humans were barely civilized savages, primitive beings who would submit to proper authority once they understood their place in the galaxy. What our returned soldiers told us painted a very different picture. The veteran stood up again, pacing slowly around the room as he continued his story. They told us about human wars, conflicts that made our current struggle look like a minor disagreement. They told us about humans who fought for decades without hope of victory, simply because they believed in something worth defending, They told us about human soldiers who sacrificed themselves not for glory or conquest, but to protect complete strangers. The recruits listened intently, beginning to understand why this story had been classified for so long. But most importantly, Zekthul said, stopping in front of the viewport again, they told us about what humans call total war. The concept that when faced with an existential threat, humans will sacrifice everything, use every resource, break every rule, to ensure their survival and the survival of what they protect. The holographic display shifted to show archived images from human history, conflicts that spanned continents and lasted for years. Our returned soldiers explained that what we were experiencing on Haven was not the desperate last stand of a doomed colony, the veteran continued. It was a carefully planned demonstration of human capabilities, designed to send a message to the entire Covenant about what would happen if we continued our expansion toward human space. A young Vorthon engineer raised one of her appendages. But, sir, surely 50,000 colonists couldn't pose a real threat to the entire Covenant fleet. Zekthul's laugh was harsh and bitter. That's exactly what Admiral Vorthak thought. He ordered an immediate assault on the main human settlement, planning to end the resistance once and for all with overwhelming force. The hologram showed massive Covenant dropships descending toward Haven's primary city, carrying thousands of elite soldiers and heavy weapons. The assault began at sunset on the third day, Zekthul continued. Every available ground unit supported by orbital bombardment and atmospheric fighters. We were going to crush the human resistance in one decisive blow. The display showed the Covenant forces advancing through the city streets, their weapons ready and their formations perfect. For the first hour, everything went according to plan, the veteran said. We secured the outer districts, established communication links, and began advancing toward the city center where the humans had their government buildings. The hologram showed steady progress, with Covenant forces methodically clearing each district and establishing control. That's when Sarah Chen contacted us again, Zekthul said quietly. She wanted to make one final offer. The display shifted to show the human leader standing in what appeared to be the city's main square, surrounded by civilians who seemed calm despite the approaching Covenant forces. She offered to surrender the city and the entire colony, the veteran continued, in exchange for safe passage for the civilian population to human space. The recruits looked relieved. This sounded like a reasonable end to what had been a brutal conflict. Admiral Vorthak rejected the offer, Zekthul said. He demanded unconditional surrender, with all humans remaining on Haven as subjects of the Covenant, standard protocol for conquered populations. The holographic display showed Chen's response, her expression growing cold as she heard the Admiral's demands. She looked directly into the camera and said something that I'll never forget, the veteran continued. She said, "Then you leave us no choice. We cannot allow the Covenant to learn what we know about human capabilities from live subjects." The recruits shifted uncomfortably. Something in Zekthul's tone suggested that Chen's words had been more than just a threat. At the time, we thought she was bluffing, the veteran admitted. What could 50,000 colonists do against 12,000 ships and 500,000 soldiers? The hologram zoomed out to show the entire city from above, with Covenant forces now controlling most of the urban area. That's when we learned the final lesson about what humans are really capable of, Zekthul said, his voice heavy with remembered horror. When they can't win, when they can't escape, when they can't save themselves, they make sure you learn nothing useful from their defeat. The display showed Chen raising a small device in her hand, her finger poised over what was obviously a detonation switch. But this wasn't just about denying us the colony, the veteran continued. This was about sending a message to every human in the galaxy about how far their people were willing to go to protect each other. Zekthul's 3 eyes closed again, and when he opened them, They were filled with the kind of pain that comes from witnessing something that fundamentally changes how you see the universe. The entire city was one massive weapon, he said quietly. 30 years of careful construction, every building designed not just for daily life, but for this moment. When Chen activated that device, Haven didn't just explode. It became a demonstration of human resolve that could be seen from orbit. The silence in the tavern was absolute as Zekthul stood motionless before the viewport, his scarred form outlined against the stars. When he finally continued speaking, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. The explosion lasted for 17 minutes, he said, each word carefully measured. Not 17 seconds, 17 minutes of continuous detonations that turned an entire city into a weapon of pure energy. Our orbital sensors registered it as equivalent to a stellar flare. The holographic display showed the impossible sight from space, a brilliant column of light reaching up from Haven's surface like a beacon calling across the galaxy. Admiral Vorthak ordered immediate evacuation of all ground forces, Zekthul continued. But it was too late. The blast hadn't just destroyed the city. It had triggered a chain reaction in the planet's geology that the humans had been preparing for decades. The recruits watched in horrified fascination as the hologram showed the explosion spreading outward from the city, following precise patterns that revealed careful engineering and planning. They had turned their entire world into one massive message, the veteran explained. Every mining operation, every geothermal tap, every underground installation was connected in a network designed to ensure that when Haven died, it would die in a way that could be seen from hundreds of light years away. A young Thessian pilot raised a trembling hand. "Sir, what happened to the Covenant forces on the surface?" Zekthul's mandibles clicked slowly. Gone. All of them. Not killed in battle, not defeated by superior tactics, but consumed by a demonstration of human determination that defied everything we thought we knew about warfare. The holographic display pulled back to show the entire planet, now wreathed in expanding rings of energy that pulsed outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. But the destruction of our ground forces was just the beginning, the veteran continued. Sarah Chen had recorded one final message before activating the device. It was broadcast on every frequency, transmitted by every communications relay in human space. The display shifted to show Chen standing in what was now obviously a bunker deep beneath the city, her expression calm despite the approaching devastation. She spoke for 3 minutes, Zekthul said. 3 minutes that changed the course of the war and redefined how the galaxy thought about human capabilities. The recruits leaned forward, desperate to understand what could have been so significant about a single speech from a doomed colony leader. "She didn't threaten us," the veteran explained. "She didn't boast about human strength or promise revenge. Instead, she did something far more terrifying. She explained exactly what the Covenant had just witnessed and what it meant for any future conflicts with humanity." The holographic display showed text scrolling past, apparently a transcript of Chen's final transmission. "She told us that Haven was not unique," Zekthul continued, "that every human colony, every human world, every human settlement had been preparing for this moment since the first contact with the Covenant. That what we had experienced was not a desperate last stand, but a standardized defensive protocol that every human community was trained to implement." The recruits exchanged horrified glances. The implications were staggering. "But that still wasn't the most dangerous part of her message," the veteran said. "The most dangerous part was when she explained what would happen if the Covenant continued its expansion toward Earth." Zekthul walked back to his seat, but remained standing, his hands gripping the back of his chair. "She told us about something humans call scorched earth policy," he said, "the practice of destroying everything of value rather than allowing it to fall into enemy hands." but she explained that humans had evolved this concept into something far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The holographic display showed star maps of human space, with thousands of colony worlds and space stations marked in soft blue light. According to Chen, the veteran continued, every human world was prepared to implement what they called stellar sterilization protocol, if Earth itself was ever threatened. Not just the destruction of individual planets, but the systematic elimination of entire star systems in a pattern designed to create an expanding wall of destruction between Earth and any approaching enemy. The star map began to shift, showing simulations of what such a strategy would look like. System after system winked out of existence, creating a growing void in space that would take millennia to cross. She explained that humans had calculated exactly how much of their own civilization they were willing to sacrifice to protect their homeworld, Zekthul said quietly. The number was 93%. They were prepared to destroy 93% of everything they had built rather than risk Earth falling to an alien conquest. A young Corvan strategist looked sick. That's impossible. No species would willingly destroy itself to that extent. Zekthul's 3 eyes fixed on the young officer. That's what Admiral Vorthak said. That's what our entire command structure believed. That's why we were completely unprepared for what happened next. The holographic display shifted to show the Covenant fleet in orbit around Haven, now a burning ember of a world that continued to pulse with unnatural energy. The Admiral decided that Chen's message was psychological warfare, the veteran explained. Clever propaganda designed to make us overestimate human resolve. He ordered the fleet to proceed to the next target, a larger human colony that intelligence indicated would provide more strategic value. The star map zoomed in to show a system designated as Kepler 442, where a human colony of over 2 million people had been established around a resource-rich world. The transit took 18 days, Zekthul continued. 18 days during which Chen's message was analyzed, debated, and ultimately dismissed by Covenant High Command. 18 days during which we convinced ourselves that Haven had been an anomaly, a desperate gamble by a small group of extremists. The display showed the Covenant fleet emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, their sensors immediately beginning long-range scans of the target world. What we found defied everything we expected, the veteran said. The colony was gone, not destroyed, not evacuated, simply absent. 2 million humans had vanished without a trace. The recruits stirred uneasily. A population that large couldn't simply disappear. Our scans showed that the planetary infrastructure was intact, Zekthul explained. Cities, factories, orbital stations, even personal belongings left behind as if the inhabitants had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The holographic display showed images of empty human settlements, perfectly preserved, but completely devoid of life. Admiral Vorthak ordered a full investigation, the veteran continued. Landing parties, detailed scans, forensic analysis of the abandoned facilities. We needed to understand what had happened. The display shifted to show Covenant soldiers exploring the empty human cities, their movements cautious despite the apparent absence of any threat. That's when we found the message centers, Zekthul said. In every major settlement, the humans had left behind detailed recordings explaining exactly what they had done and why. The hologram showed a human civilian, apparently one of the colony administrators, standing in what looked like a government building. The recording explained that the colonists had received advance warning of our approach, the veteran continued. Not from human military intelligence, but from refugees fleeing Haven. Chen's message hadn't just been broadcast to the Covenant fleet. It had been transmitted throughout human space as a warning and a call to action. The recruits began to understand the scope of what they were hearing. This wasn't just the story of one battle or one failed conquest. This was the tale of an entire species mobilizing for total war. The colonists had implemented what they called dispersal protocol, Zekthul explained. Every human on the planet had been evacuated to locations that our sensors couldn't detect or reach. The colony infrastructure had been left intact, not as an oversight, but as a trap. The holographic display zoomed in on one of the abandoned cities, revealing hidden sensors and recording devices throughout the empty buildings. They were studying us, the veteran said with grudging admiration. Learning our tactics, our technology, our behavior patterns. Every move we made on that empty world was being recorded and analyzed by human observers we couldn't detect. A young Altarian recruit looked confused. But, sir, if the planet was empty, why was it a trap? Zekthul's mandibles clicked in that bitter way again. Because the humans weren't just evacuating their people. They were training them. 2 million colonists hadn't fled to safety. They had been transformed into the largest military force in human space, all of them motivated by the knowledge of what had happened to Haven. The star map appeared again, but now it showed movement throughout human space, with thousands of ships and millions of people relocating according to patterns that suggested massive coordination and planning. While we were investigating one empty world, the veteran continued, the humans were turning their entire civilization into a military machine designed around a single principle: make the cost of conquest greater than any possible benefit. The holographic display showed Admiral Vorthak in his command center, surrounded by reports and tactical displays that painted an increasingly grim picture. It took us 3 weeks to understand what we were really facing, Zekthul said. 3 weeks during which human refugees flooded into every corner of their space, carrying with them detailed accounts of Covenant capabilities and intentions. The display shifted to show human settlements throughout the galaxy, all of them now buzzing with activity as civilian populations prepared for war. But the refugees carried more than just information, the veteran continued. They carried Chen's message, her final words that explained exactly what humanity was willing to sacrifice to maintain their independence. The hologram showed groups of humans gathering to listen to recordings of Chen's speech, their faces showing a mixture of grief and determination. That message became what humans call a rally cry, Zekthul explained. A unifying principle that transformed millions of individual human communities into a single coordinated resistance movement. The star map now showed the true scope of human civilization, with hundreds of worlds and billions of people all connected by the shared knowledge of what the Covenant intended and what their own people had already sacrificed to resist it. By the time Admiral Vorthak realized what was happening, it was too late to prevent what came next, the veteran said quietly. The humans had used our own invasion as a catalyst to unite their entire species around a single goal: demonstrate to the galaxy that some things are more important than survival. The holographic display showed the Covenant fleet receiving new orders, directing them to abort the current operation and withdraw to friendly space. High Command had finally understood what we were facing, Zekthul continued. Not just military resistance, but something far more dangerous. An entire civilization that had chosen principles over pragmatism. The recruits sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. They were beginning to understand why this story had been classified for so long. The withdrawal took 6 months, the veteran said. 6 months during which human refugees continued to spread throughout the galaxy, carrying with them the story of Haven and the promise that any attack on Earth would result in the systematic destruction of everything humans had built over centuries of expansion. The star map showed the Covenant fleet's retreat, but also revealed something else. Human ships following at a distance, observing and recording every aspect of Covenant military doctrine. But the most terrifying thing, Zekthul continued, was what the humans did after we left. The holographic display showed the Kepler 442 system again, but now it was filled with massive construction projects and industrial activity. They rebuilt everything, the veteran said with something approaching awe. Not just the colony, but something far larger and more sophisticated. They turned that empty world into a demonstration of what human determination could accomplish when focused on a single goal. The display zoomed in to show vast shipyards, research facilities, and training centers that dwarfed anything the humans had possessed before the war. Within 5 years, Kepler 442 had become the largest military-industrial complex in human space, Zechthul explained. All of it built by refugees who had lost everything to Covenant aggression and who were now dedicated to ensuring that no other human community would face the same choice that Haven had been forced to make. The veteran finally sat down, his massive frame settling into the chair with obvious exhaustion. "That," he said quietly, "is what humans are really capable of. Not just resistance, not just sacrifice, but the transformation of tragedy into strength, of loss into determination, of defeat into victory." The holographic display faded to black, leaving the tavern in relative darkness. The war ended not because the Covenant couldn't defeat human military forces, Zechthul continued, but because we finally understood that defeating humans would require the complete destruction of our own civilization. They had made the cost of victory greater than the value of conquest. A young Vorthon engineer spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, what happened to Admiral Vorthak?" The old veteran's expression grew sad. "He requested transfer to a research position, studying xenobiology. He spent the rest of his career trying to understand how a species could be so individually fragile, yet so collectively indestructible." Zechthul stood up slowly, gathering his belongings as the privacy field began to fade. "That's what I want you to remember," he said, looking at each of the young recruits in turn. "Humans aren't dangerous because of their technology or their tactics. They're dangerous because they've learned something that most species never discover. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the willingness to lose everything in defense of what you believe." He paused at the door, looking back at the group one final time. "And that," he said quietly, "is why the galaxy is a safer place with humans as our allies rather than our enemies. Because a species capable of what I witnessed on Haven is capable of anything." As the old warrior left the tavern, the recruits sat in contemplative silence, each of them processing the story they had just heard and what it meant for their understanding of the universe they lived in. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the struggles of the civilizations that moved among them. But for those who had listened to Zechthul's tale, those stars would never look quite the same again. They would always carry the reminder that somewhere among them lived a species that had chosen principles over survival, and in doing so had redefined what it meant to be truly powerful.